Tottenham have just completed their club record signing Dominic Solanke for £65 million. Now, more significantly, the upfront payment for this transfer was £30 million, which is not normal in today's market. We typically see payments staggered much more aggressively across a period of time, which means Tottenham have a lot of confidence in this signing. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put such a large upfront amount down, which obviously goes against their PSR limits for the season. Now, why did they spend this much money on Solanke? And when you look into the numbers, it really does make sense why Ange Postecoglou was so certain that this was the right player of the right profile to take Spurs to the next level. Spurs' current strike force is currently worth £120 million, but the signing of Richarlison has largely not worked out since Ange Postecoglou took over. Now, he wasn't Ange Postecoglou's player, so we don't put that on Ange, but there's many attributes Richie has, which Spurs fans often highlight that do fit Ange ball, and that is his work rate mostly, that he wants to press, and that he can also play in versatile positions across the front three, because Ange likes a dynamic front three that can swap into each other's role. But Solanke is a much better fit than Richarlison, and we're going to go on to discuss why. So I've seen a lot of skepticism around Solanke's XG in particular, and for those who aren't aware of what XG really means, in the simplest terms, it's your expected goals based on the likelihood of a chance that you had. So if you're 2 yards in front of goal with an open net and you take a shot, that's going to have a very high XG. If you're taking a shot from 40 yards away, with multiple defenders and a goalkeeper in front of you, that's going to be a very low XG. So what we're looking for here is players that typically are good, in what Spurs eyes have been looking for, players that are very good at scoring goals even when they're in positions that it's unlikely that a normal player would score. Because in many people's eyes, that highlights what a good striker is. A player that can take an opportunity which most players wouldn't be able to take. Now, the reality is that is the wrong way to look at XG. And a lot of people have used that to bash Solanke with and say he's not very good. He's got an average XG for a striker when you put him up against other players who are similar. However, if you look at the likes of Ronaldo, who was the top goal scorer in Europe for a long period of time, over his previous last 6 seasons in his European stint, he had a below average XG, despite averaging a goal a game. If you look at Erling Haaland, he scored 27 goals last season, but had an expected XG of over 32 goals. Again, he was below average in terms of his XG to chances converted. Now, this is really important to understand with Solanke, because even though his XG conversion is better than Haaland's, it's deemed as a weakness that he hasn't got an above average XG. And this is largely because Spurs have the best finisher arguably of all time in the Premier League era in Heung-min Son, who vastly exceeds his typical XG. So another player that does that has typically been Harry Kane. So we've looked at those two players as our benchmark of success of what a striker has. Now, the likes of Pep Guardiola, Mikel Arteta and Postecoglou are deemed forward-thinking managers who go outside the typical mould of thinking, and they have a different approach. You don't have to think far back to when Man City didn't even have a striker and they went on to win the Premier League. Sterling was their top goal scorer in most of those seasons. And the reason is because these managers, and you'll look at Arsenal now as well, when they still aren't on the hunt for a striker, they're prioritising a midfielder right now, despite only having Jesus and Nketiah up front who don't have great XG conversions. Now, why is that? That is because these innovative managers, and Postecoglou's the same, have realised it's not about a player's ability to take chances on an above average basis. It's more important you find players who can put themselves into goal scoring positions more regularly. So what you look at instead is how often does that player put themselves into a position to score. Now, as long as they're scoring more often than not the chances they should, you don't overly fixate on them being outstanding finishers. They just need to be good finishers. It's better to put yourself into 10 chances and take 5 than to only be within chance to score 3 times and score 3. And that is the school of thought of Arteta, Guardiola and Postecoglou. So you'll see these all worked out in a very calculated way. They've also realised that the chance of you scoring from a low cross is significantly higher than a aerial cross outside the box, which is when you look at Solanke's goals, he has scored the vast majority of his goals inside the penalty area from low balls, low crosses. And that's the same with what happened with Sterling under Pep Guardiola, right? It's how do you get that ball whipped in, low cross to the feet of that player in a position where it's likely they'll score, or put a through ball in that leaves them one-on-one in the opposition's penalty box. And it's a similar story with the unmentionables in Arsenal. Now, you'll remember that Spurs over the last season, we had a very similar approach, right? The stereotypical Postecoglous goal was you play out the back, you work your way up to the byline. A player like Johnson would typically cut in right at the edge of the pitch, low whipping cross across goal, just in front of the goalkeeper, and someone will be there to tap it in. Now, more often than not, anyone who's reasonably good at finishing is going to be able to take that chance. They don't like to waste opportunities by putting in loopy crosses or trying risky through balls. And that is why we've seen long shots in particular dropping off dramatically over the last 6 months under Ange. And other managers have followed suit, right? So you'll see Man City rarely take them. Foden took a couple more out of frustration than anything else that did come off. And Arsenal take the same approach, right? So it's all about minimizing waste and maximizing output. So that's why Spurs have looked into Solanke. He has an outstanding total XG. So he puts himself into these goal-scoring positions significantly more than other players do in teams around him. So the only players to put themselves into more goal-scoring positions than Solanke last season were Erling Haaland, that was Isaac, and it was Mo Salah. No one else managed to get themselves into more goal-scoring opportunities. Now, that is particularly impressive when you compare Solanke playing for Bournemouth than the likes of Haaland obviously playing for Manchester City. If you'd put Haaland in that Bournemouth side, you'd probably see very close results in terms of those players getting themselves into goal-scoring positions. Now, I'm not saying Solanke is as good as Haaland, but I'm saying that he gets himself into as many opportunities to score as players like that do when in a similar environment. He's outperformed the likes of Ollie Watkins, who get huge praise at the moment. Over the last season, he was seen as one of the most shining forward players in the Premier League that Spurs would probably have to fork out over £100 million if they'd wanted. And they probably wouldn't leave Villa anyway, because they've got significant backing now. But the point is, Spurs have found an alternative player who is stronger on the ball, offers more pressing ability, which is another key part of Ange Postecoglou's requirements for a striker, but also has put himself into more goal-scoring opportunities and scored the same number of goals as Ollie Watkins. And he's probably about half the price. So you can completely understand now why Ange has wanted him. And Ange said in his interview just recently that they've desperately been looking for a striker who fits our style of football. So that is Solanke, because it's not only about putting yourselves into these chances, but it's a striker as well who's going to press really aggressively from the front. And this is another strength that Solanke has. He is not scared of really challenging that goalkeeper and that forward. And he did something really clever quite often for Bournemouth over the last season, which we'll probably see at Spurs. What he's realised, Solanke, is as more and more teams start to play out the back, the goalkeeper is integral to that. And his job is to prevent that ball from leaving the goalkeeper or the defender and going further up the pitch if he can, right? That's a bonus if your striker can help do that. So what he's realised and done very well is he's preempted where that ball is going to start from a build-out play. So if a team starts by building out with the goalkeeper, he will be standing on top of that goalkeeper before the ball's even been passed back to him. He will cancel out phases of play in really smart ways, and in ways that means he can conserve energy for later on in the game. So he's an intelligent player. He's a very strong player. He's a solid finisher, but he's also very clever at getting himself into goal-scoring positions with a great work rate. He is a great option for Spurs. It would not be surprising to see him comfortably surpass 20 goals next season, considering he scored 19 in that Bournemouth side. That's no small feat, and it often went under the radar simply because Ollie Watkins was also an English player who had kind of surpassed expectations that season. But he was playing in a much more watched team, and Villa were kind of the exciting topic of the season. So Solanke kind of slid under the radar there as Spurs have spotted it. You just have to look on social media now. The vast majority of Bournemouth fans are saying that it was too cheap that we got him for that price. And the only reason we got him for that price was that he had a release clause for £65 million that we were able to effectively leverage. Yeah, great signing. We're going to be diving into Solanke in much more detail on Monday with the wider pod crew alongside a Bournemouth fan. So if you do want to listen to that, make sure you do subscribe, because otherwise you won't get a notification when that comes out. He's likely to start today against Bayern Munich if you're watching that game, and be unveiled today as a player. So make sure you tune in. I believe it's on Spurs Play. Up the Spurs.